Welcome to The Deep Dive, your ultimate shortcut to truly being well-informed. Today we're embarking on, well, a really crucial journey, I think. It touches the very foundation of our future, our young people. We're diving deep into the scientific evidence surrounding cannabis use, specifically among children, adolescents, and young adults. Our mission is to cut through all the noise, look at the latest peer-reviewed research and really understand the actual impacts, the implications for these younger generations, not just what people think they know. Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah, this is a critical discussion, absolutely. The whole landscape around cannabis, perception, legality, it's changing so fast. And because of that, it's just essential we acknowledge the unique vulnerabilities of developing brains.
That phrase, developing brain, keeps coming up.
It has to. And what's often overlooked is that, well, most adults who eventually develop substance use disorders actually started using during adolescence.
Really? That early?
Yes, that's a powerful indicator, right? It shows just how crucial and, frankly, how sensitive this developmental window truly is.
That's a profound point. Adolescence as this sort of foundational period for later substance use issues. So, okay, let's set the stage. What's the current picture? How prevalent is cannabis use among young people today?
Well, the numbers are, they're quite striking. If you look at 2023 data for U.S. 12th graders, cannabis was the third most used substance.
Third, after what?
After alcohol, which was at 24.3% reporting past month use, and nicotine at 19.5%, cannabis came in at 18.4%.
Wow. Nearly 1 in 5 high school seniors using in the past month.
Exactly. And if we zoom out, look globally, it's actually the most widely used illicit drug, period.
To hear cannabis usage rates that high right alongside alcohol and nicotine for seniors, that's genuinely concerning. You mentioned the broad vulnerability of adolescents. Are there more specific factors driving this current surge?
Well, what's fascinating here, or maybe concerning is a better word, is that adolescence isn't just any period of vulnerability. It's a really unique window of neurological and psychosocial development. Brains are literally being built. And the science consistently suggests delaying any substance use, but especially cannabis, until adulthood, just to mitigate these significant, often lifelong risks.
And that early start is a predictor for long-term issues.
Absolutely. It's a consistent predictor precisely because the brain is still under construction,
It really feels like there's been a huge shift.
Yeah.
In how young people, maybe even society overall, perceives cannabis. When you hear teens talking about it as safer than alcohol, or even like a natural remedy for anxiety, stress, maybe sleep issues.
Right.
How does that perception square with the science?
Yeah.
Especially with these vulnerable developing brains.
That perception, it's a major piece of the puzzle, a major challenge. This normalization, this idea that it's natural or harmless, coupled with what we're now calling the new cannabis, it creates unique risks that just weren't there generations ago.
The new cannabis. What do you mean by that?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the cannabis available today is fundamentally different, massively different. Think about it like this. Cannabis from, say, the 70s or 80s might have been like a light beer in terms of potency.
Okay.
What's often on the market today, it's more like a high-proof spirit. Seriously. Dried flower that used to average maybe 2-4% THC now routinely hits 10-20%, sometimes higher.
10 to 20%, that's a huge jump.
It is, and concentrates. They can soar past 50%, even over 90% THC in some products. This isn't just a slightly stronger version, it's interacting with a developing brain in a profoundly different way.
That scale of potency increase. It's kind of staggering, actually. So what are the immediate effects, behaviorally, physiologically, when someone consumes something 5-10 times stronger than before? And what are the forms it comes in now?
The consequences are significant. And yeah, the forms are incredibly diverse now. It's not just about smoking dried flower anymore. We're talking concentrates, edibles, vape cartridges, dabbing, all designed to deliver these super high THC levels really efficiently.
Right, the vapes are everywhere.
They are. And we absolutely cannot forget synthetic cannabinoids, things sold as spice or K2.
Yeah.
These can be 10 to 200 times more potent than natural THC. And they carry severe risks, acute psychosis, kidney damage, even fatal overdoses in some cases.
200 times.
Yeah. So you put it all together, these incredibly potent products, easier access, and this normalizing environment. It creates a really concerning landscape for young brains, far removed from that casual perception of natural or harmless.
That definitely paints a much more alarming picture than I think many people realize. So, okay, let's dive into the core science. What exactly does cannabis, especially these newer high-potency forms, do to a developing brain and body?
Right. This is where understanding brain development itself is just absolutely key. The human brain keeps developing, refining connections well into the mid-20s.
Mid-20s, not like
Bookworms. Nope. And cannabinoids, the active chemicals in cannabis like THC, they essentially hijack the brain's own endocannabinoid system. Think of this system as like your brain's internal messaging network.
Nah.
It's constantly fine-tuning everything: mood, memory, appetite, pain perception.
Okay.
THC jumps right into that system. It disrupts the normal communication, especially during this critical developmental phase, and specifically, it activates the brain's reward pathway. That's what leads to the intoxicating effects, the high. But when this intricate system gets disrupted repeatedly, especially during these formative years, it can have lasting consequences on the brain's actual structure and how it functions long term.
And what are those specific impacts on the brain itself, on thinking, cognition? I've heard about actual structural changes.
You have, and the research backs that up. Cannabis use in adolescence is consistently associated with decreased brain volume in certain areas and impaired cognitive performance, things like memory, attention, learning. Longitudinal studies, the ones that follow kids over time, show a dose-dependent thinning of the prefrontal cortex, the PFC.
Dose-dependent meaning the more you use, the more thinning.
Exactly. And the PFC, that's basically the brain's CEO, right? It handles executive functions. Decision-making, impulse control, planning ahead, all crucial skills for navigating life, especially as a young adult. What's really striking is that altered cortical thickness has been seen later, around age 22, even when researchers control for recent cannabis use, suggesting the changes might persist.
Wow. Persist even after stopping.
The evidence points that way, though more research is ongoing. Now, there is a glimmer of hope in some findings about epigenetic changes. These are fascinating shifts in how your genes are expressed. Think of it like turning a gene's volume up or down without changing the gene itself. Some research suggests these changes might be reversible for some effects, but the initial impact is undeniably significant.
So it's not just about feeling high temporarily. We're talking tangible, potentially lasting structural changes in the command center of the brain. What about other health effects, both short-term and long-term?
Okay, short-term effects. Pretty immediate disruption of learning and memory. That's a big one for students. Also, motor control, coordination, sleep patterns. Users can experience altered senses, big mood swings, sometimes panic attacks, and in some cases, acute psychosis, hallucinations, or really severe nausea and vomiting.
And long-term?
Long-term, especially with smoking and often co-use with tobacco, we see links to lung and breathing problems, an increased risk for stroke. There are strong correlations with poor academic performance, truancy, dropping out, higher rates of social anxiety, and, tragically, links to increased risk for suicidal thoughts, attempts, and even completion. Plus, there's a condition called cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome that's severe, repeated nausea and vomiting. It can be really debilitating for chronic users.
That's a comprehensive and, frankly, quite alarming list. And I know there's been a lot of focus on specific psychiatric risks, particularly the link to psychosis. What's the latest science telling us there?
Yeah, the link between adolescent cannabis use and an increased risk for psychosis and schizophrenia, it's pretty robust in the literature. And it's a concern that's only grown with these high-potency products. The risk is highest with early onset use, frequent use, and again, using those high-potency products. And here's where it gets really interesting. Or concerning. High-potency cannabis is increasingly being shown to account for worse psychotic effects, even when you factor in genetic predispositions.
Wait, so it's not just unmasking something that was already there. It could actually contribute to it.
The evidence is pointing strongly in that direction. It suggests the sheer strength of modern cannabis might be capable of triggering these outcomes, or worsening them significantly, beyond just activating an underlying vulnerability. It fundamentally changes how we need to think about that risk.
Given all these substantial risks, brain changes, health issues, psychosis link, how likely is it for young users to actually develop a full-blown cannabis use disorder, or CUD?
That's another critical piece. Adolescent cannabis use represents a key window for developing CUD. Teens face a 2 to 3 times higher risk of developing CUD compared to adults who start using later, regardless of how intensely they use.
So the age you start matters more than how much you use for developing the disorder.
For the risk of developing the disorder itself, yes. Age of initiation is a huge factor, and the key predictors for developing CUD. Things like adverse childhood experiences, prenatal cannabis exposure, high stress levels, that early age of onset we mentioned, high frequency of use, and consistently using high-potency THC products.
Okay, so we've explored the profound changes cannabis can cause in the individual's brain and body. But these effects don't happen in a vacuum, right? They ripple outwards. So thinking about those neurological impacts, how does this play out in the daily lives of young people? What are the broader social, educational consequences?
Exactly. The ripple effect is significant. We see strong links between heavy cannabis use starting early in adolescence and, well, academic failure. Tragically, this often leads to school dropout. Think about a student who is doing well, maybe aiming for college. Cannabis use becomes heavy, grades slip, they lose interest in activities, maybe they stop going altogether.
That's heartbreaking.
It is. And beyond school, regular cannabis use is also associated with higher rates of unemployment and welfare dependence later in life. These aren't just isolated outcomes, they're patterns that can really shape an individual's entire life path, limiting potential and opportunities.
The whole gateway drug idea, it's always been controversial, hasn't it? Some dismiss it, others see a clear path. With this new data on high-potency stuff and earlier use, are we seeing stronger evidence for that kind of effect, or is it still more complex?
It's a great question. And yeah, the science has moved beyond simplistic gateway labels, but what the research does consistently show is that regular adolescent cannabis users are at a significantly higher risk of escalating to other illicit drugs later on. There's a clear dose-response relationship observed, meaning the more frequently cannabis is used in adolescence, the higher the risk for using other illicit drugs down the line.
It's not inevitable.
No, not inevitable, but a strong predictor. And conversely, this is important. Quitting cannabis in young adulthood consistently predicts a lower likelihood of using other illicit drugs.
So stopping use actually reduces the risk of moving on to other things.
Exactly. It underscores the pivotal role cannabis use plays during this period.
What about using cannabis with other substances, especially tobacco? That combination seems particularly worrying for young people.
It absolutely is. A major public health concern. Tobacco and marijuana use are very strongly related in young people. And this co-use, it can significantly increase dependence on both substances. It often makes mental health symptoms worse, too. There was a revealing study with college students. It found 65% who used both tobacco and marijuana smoked them within the same hour.
Same hour.
Yeah. And 31% actually reported using tobacco specifically to try and prolong the effects of the marijuana high. Plus, frequent cannabis use can actually predict starting to use tobacco and developing nicotine dependence later. It's a really tangled relationship.
A vicious cycle, sounds like, each one reinforcing the other.
Precisely, making it much harder to quit either one.
Okay, so we've covered the inherent vulnerabilities, the direct health impacts, the social ripple effects, but these aren't happening in a static world. What external forces, like our digital age or changing laws, are maybe amplifying these trends?
That's a crucial dimension, and it raises an important question. How does all this time spent on social media affect young people's views and actions regarding cannabis? A 2023 study out of Oklahoma looked right at this. It found adolescents, kids aged 13-17, who spent over 1.5 hours a day on social media, which was nearly 70% of their sample, by the way.
That many, okay.
Yeah. Those kids had significantly greater pro-cannabis attitudes. Attitudes like believing cannabis is an effective treatment for mental health problems, or the really dangerous idea that driving while high is safer than driving drunk.
Oh, wow.
And these pro-cannabis attitudes, they were directly linked to 1.8 times greater odds of actually using cannabis in the past month. And here's the kicker. Exposure to pro-cannabis content online had a stronger link to these attitudes than the kids' own reported mental health symptoms did.
Wait, say that again. The online content had a stronger link to pro-use attitudes than their own mental health status.
That's what the study found. It suggests the narrative they're seeing online, the normalization, the positive framing. It can be incredibly powerful in shaping their beliefs, maybe even overriding their own internal experiences or struggles when it comes to risk perception.
That is incredibly powerful and maybe not what you'd expect. Now let's talk about legalization policies themselves. What's the data showing in states where recreational cannabis is legal? Are we seeing an impact on youth use?
The evidence points to a clear impact, yes. Looking at states like Colorado, Washington, Oregon, Alaska, Nevada, places with established recreational markets. These markets have been associated with increases in both the prevalence, how many people are using, and the initiation, how many are starting to use cannabis. Specifically, one major study found moderate increases among adolescents aged 12-17. About an 11% rise in prevalence, 13% rise in initiation, measured 2 to 4 years after dispensaries open.
Moderate increases. But still, that's thousands more kids starting.
Exactly. And importantly, even larger increases were seen in young adults, 18-25, and older adults. So the impact isn't limited to teens, but they are affected.
It kind of makes sense that legalization would lead to some increase, but can you break down why? Is it just that it's easier to get, or is it more complex?
It's definitely multifaceted. Availability is part of it, sure, but it goes deeper. First, you often see lower costs. Legal production brings economies of scale, making products cheaper. Second, yes, there's greater physical accessibility, more retail outlets, more visible in communities. Third, and this is critical, it leads to normalization. Seeing stores, seeing ads, it reduces stigma, makes it seem commonplace, less risky. Fourth, that feeds into decreased risk perception. If it's legal, people, especially young people, might think, well, it must be safe, right?
Mhm.
And finally, these legal markets often push the popularity of those high-potency products we talked about. They become the norm, the readily available option. All these factors work together.
Right. It creates this whole permissive environment. Okay, so given these complex challenges, the changing perceptions, the social media influence, the potent products, the clear science on harm to developing brains, what can we actually do? Let's shift to solutions, prevention strategies.
Okay. A primary focus has to be on public health messaging and education, but it needs to be smart, targeted. We have to directly address those pro-cannabis attitudes fueled by misinformation, correct the myths, especially around self-treating mental health issues without any evidence or guidance. Media literacy interventions are also crucial. Teaching young people how to think critically about the content they see online, especially on social media, spotting marketing tactics, understanding bias, and public health campaigns need to actively denormalize use in adolescents. We can learn a lot from the successes of tobacco prevention, which really shifted social norms over time.
Makes sense. Educate, build critical thinking skills, change the social norms. What about kids who are already using heavily or struggling with dependence? What about intervention and treatment?
Yes, early identification and getting kids into effective treatment has to be a priority. We need interventions that address multiple levels. Just changing attitudes might not be enough if there are underlying mental health issues, family problems, or peer pressure involved. We have seen promising results, things like multidimensional family therapy for teens with cannabis abuse or dependence. Studies show it can work, maybe helping around 60% improve symptoms. But a big hurdle is just getting young. Well, given everything we know about brain development continuing into the mid-20s, there are strong arguments for making sales illegal to anyone under 21. Aligning it with alcohol. Product regulation is also vital, banning flavors designed to attract kids. Limiting THC potency, some places are already doing this, like Connecticut capping flower at 30% THC, concentrates at 60%. Also requiring plain packaging, child-resistant, opaque, resealable, making it less appealing and harder for kids to access.
What about advertising?
Huge. Restrictions on marketing and advertising are essential, especially banning ads in places or on platforms where lots of young people will see them. And finally, things like licensing and zoning, controlling how many cannabis shops there are, where they can be located, keeping them away from schools, for example.
So lots of potential policy levers there. Okay, if we were to quickly summarize the key factors, what increases risk and what protects young people?
Right. Key risk factors seem to be perceiving cannabis as low harm, having peers who use, and maybe lower levels of parental supervision or communication about substance use. On the flip side, protective factors include strong parental disapproval of use, feeling connected to school, being involved in school activities, or other positive pursuits.
Okay, so it really highlights the roles of perception, peers, parents, and school connection. It's a whole ecosystem. This deep dive has really laid out the complexities, hasn't it? Cannabis use among young people. It's so nuanced. We've covered the science, the impacts on brain development, overall well-being, and the interplay of social media, changing perceptions, policy. And the key takeaway for me is that this new cannabis, the high-potency stuff, is just vastly different. Its effects on developing brains are significant, potentially long-lasting.
Absolutely. And the conversation around cannabis is changing so rapidly. It's just essential, really, for everyone, individuals, families, communities, to stay informed with the actual evidence. We need to approach this topic with critical thinking, especially when it comes to our most vulnerable groups. Children, adolescents, young adults whose brains are still maturing. The data really points to an urgent need for careful consideration. How we regulate, how we educate, how we support young people in this landscape. Prioritizing their long-term health and their future potential has to be the goal.
We really encourage you, our listeners, to reflect on this information. Maybe start some informed discussions in your own circles, with family, friends, in your communities. And think about supporting evidence-based strategies that truly prioritize the health and well-being of our younger generations. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. We really hope this has given you plenty to think about and maybe armed you with some solid information. Tune in next time for another deep dive into the topics that shape our world.